This podcast is sponsored by Inside Out Group, the specialists in high-risk and challenging filming and time-lapse, covering health and safety videos for rail, construction, and infrastructure projects nationwide.
And we're live. Welcome to this week's Safer Than Your Average. On the show this week, we have Malcolm. Malcolm, I first came across in the IOSH magazine way back in early 2008. He'd just taken up his role that he's in at the moment, and he was one of the first people that I seen speaking about human performance, engaging the workforce having the answers to some of the questions that are the burning questions that we're looking for, and bringing people on the journey. He was the first person that I encountered that was talking about the human performance and the human psychology relating to safety. And I was really interested to get him on the show. So thank you for coming along, Malcolm. If you just want to come in and give us a short introduction to yourself.
Not a problem at all, Blair. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I didn't know that, so that's quite an interesting fact about yourself, actually. So I'm Malcolm Staves. I currently I look after health, safety, well-being, and fire prevention for L'Oreal. So that's L'Oreal globally, from operations through to research, through to the sales force, as well as the stores. But that's been something that's come to me after many, many years of working in health and safety, and even not. I haven't actually got a formal health and safety profession, just to let you know, Blair. So I was born in a place called Barton upon Humber, which is what I would call the north of England, but it's a little bit south of the UK than you are. And brought up in a family with not a lot of money. In fact, in the town where I was brought up, the name Staves is associated with being tight. So believe it or not, so the family has not really spent, well, my father and his family were very, very tight, and the reputation came with them. So through a very normal education, failed English language at school, failed French at school, got them second time round when I did my what was called O-levels. But at an early age, I decided I wanted to do engineering, I wanted to do something like that. So that focused the subjects that I took at school. Eventually, I went to university. I always wanted to go to university as an objective. And I was sponsored by British Steel in Scunthorpe. They sponsored me to go to university. And my degree was in chemical engineering, okay? When I left university with my degree, British Steel, where my focus was environmental side, decided that there wasn't a place for me. So I looked around and I went to Lang's. I went to John Lang Construction, worked for a number of years for them, including the project that we've talked about before in the north of Scotland, which was absolutely fantastic. But I realized that they were never going to get me chartered. I was in the wrong type of industry to be chartered. So I jumped ship and went to work for a large chemical company in Ellesmere Port that made the lead additive for petrol aviation fuel. And there was one bit along that whereby this company has actually been sold, and we're being audited as part of due diligence. And we had 150 tons of liquefied chlorine on site. I won't let the auditor on site because he had a beard like you. And if we had a major release of chlorine, there would be a problem with the fit test for the PPE and all the rest of it. And I just wouldn't let him on my site. Didn't go down very well. He was very angry. Bottom line, he was told to shave his beard or else he couldn't do it. He went all the way up to the CEO. The CEO agreed with him that he could do it. And so we had to, in the end of the day, I gave in, for want of an expression. 3 months later, the guy came back and offered me a job as an environmental consultant in a big environmental company, which was a complete change for me because I was in production, line management. So I changed. I thought, well, why not? Worked for them for a while, and after a few years, my biggest client, who was a company called American National Can, asked me, hey, do you want to come work for us? You were doing all this work and we're paying you, or this company, a lot of money. Why don't you come work for us? So I did that. And as a result of working for them, I took the first site in 1996 globally to 14,001, and I became a name. And what happened there is they then invited me to, if I wanted to take over health and safety, apply the same kind of logic approach. 2 years later, I headed up a company called Peshene, who was the parent company for environmental health and safety and corporate social responsibility at that time. and they then became Alcan. I don't know if you've ever heard of Alcan. So I worked for them for a while, and eventually one thing led to another, and I came to L'Oreal in 2008 and never regretted it. So a bit of my career. I've got a sister. I'm married. I live in France. 3 boys. One of them's doing a PhD down in Lancaster, not far away, in cybersecurity. I'm a Chelsea fan since 1970. I absolutely love Chelsea. And I'm a heavy metal fan. I go to metal concerts with my kids and everything. So a little bit in a nutshell, Malcolm Staves, but I'm sure I forgot some stuff.
Excellent, thanks, Malcolm. So if we just move on a little bit, we'll talk about your first job after leaving school. Tell us a little bit of detail about it.
First job after leaving school was working with John Lang's, a Lang construction. Actually, it was a joint venture with a French company called Degremont. So Degremont and Lang's had created a joint venture to make water treatment plants, right? Drinking water, wastewater. So I joined them straight after leaving university, down in Boreham Wood, where the headquarters was. And within about a year, they'd sent me to, even less, to the north of Scotland, to a place called Tain, where I fell in love with whiskey and only Glenmorangie. I only drink Glenmorangie. I also got used to drinking after hours in the room at the back of the pub with the doors closed. At that time, even the policemen would come in because everybody was in the same big room, and they would watch everything going and drinking down to the early hours of the morning. And so I built a water treatment plant up there, which was, it was hard work, because very quickly what happened was I was on my own. The site construction manager, I was 25 years old. The site construction manager left for whatever reasons, and they asked me to finish the project with all the contractors and all the rest of it. And at 25, I was way out of my depth, but very confident, and I tried to do it and did quite well, but I needed a lot of help. I mean, I had to ask for a lot of help of the people down in London. People came up to help me, but it was quite an experience. And it was also an experience of life. I mean, I don't know how well you know the Highlands, but everybody's very friendly. Everybody drinks a lot. And I had a thing called an access card. If you've ever heard of an access card, it was pre-Visa. So it was Visa and access at one point. And I remember spending per month on drink that I would actually earn in the month as well. So I was going negative every month. So that is definitely something to cut. You know that. I mean, this is just between us and the 3 million or whatever 100 people that are going to be watching this. But yeah, it was a life experience working in Scotland and being so young, I must admit.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you for that, Malcolm. So if we move on a little bit, how did the transition from that into a health and safety role occur then?
Well, that was where I briefly said sort of after that, I went into mainstream chemicals, and primarily it was I wanted to become a chartered chemical engineer. That was my goal now, and I knew I wasn't going to get the right kind of skills in construction. So when this consultancy came in, after I had the discussion about the guy and the fit testing and the chlorine, so he just came to me and said, so do you want to join us? And at that time, a consultancy very often will say to a client, yes, we can do it, and then they look for the resources. So as I had a chemical engineering background, rather than doing pure environment, I also started to do a little bit of health and safety, which was the initial thing. But eventually, as I said, my number one client, which was a company called American National Can, which was called Nacanco in the UK, they offered me a job as being the environmental manager for Europe, because I've been doing so much work for them as a consultant. And I took, as I said, the first can plant in the company to 14,001. It was also the first can plant globally in 14,001 of any company to go to take that certificate. And it was the first one in the parent company, which was a big aluminium company called Pechenay based in France. So I became a little bit of by chance, a name overnight, if I'd have been second to do ISO 14001 in the company, it would have been totally different, I would have thought. But sometimes there's a benefit of doing something first rather than being second or third. And they then asked me, well, if I could apply the same approach of systems, management, organization to health and safety because they were looking to do something more in health and safety. So I said yes, and that's how it happened. And I'll be honest with you, in the first couple of years, because all of a sudden I was put in order where there was no order before across the European sites, improvement came. It comes automatically. As soon as you put focus on a subject, you get the improvement, and that's what happened there. And never looked back ever since. And I've enjoyed I enjoy working in health and safety, and I'll tell you why. Because it's all, I feel as if you're making a real difference to other people, and it's like, you know, caring for people. It's very, from inside me, it's very important, and it just was the right fit. I've just loved it ever since.
That probably brings me over to ask the next question is, how did you move into the performance development type of field, the human performance side of things, and really start to draw that out? Because you've done some great initiatives, and I'm not going to give the game away by releasing them all right now. Talk through them a little bit, each in detail, and talk about each one, how you came to the realisation of those.
Wow, you might have to remind me of a couple of them along the way. When I went from American, well, it was quite strange. When I worked for Nikanka, which was part of this American company called American National Can, I actually thought this company, American National Can, based in Chicago, was the holding company, was corporate, right? And we called them corporate. And back in about 1996, all of a sudden the name Péchenet, which was a French company, appeared on the letterhead. And I asked the question, who is this company? You know, I've never heard of them before. And apparently they were the parent company, the holding company, for quite a number of years. But the number one customers of American National Can was the likes of Coca-Cola, Pepsi, etc. Péchenet, up until the end of '96, was owned by the French government, right? So this will fit into the story. You'll see where I'm going. And the likes of at the time, the Coca-Cola and Pepsi, from what I understand, were not too keen on the American public knowing that the number one supplier was actually owned by the French government, right? And there was a link there. Whether that's a true story or not, I don't know, but it seemed to fit with the logic that I'd never heard of this corporate company, Péchenet. In '96, they privatized. Right, they were privatized because they were no longer owned by the government, and that's when they appeared on the letterhead. And I knew then that the company was in Paris and not in Chicago. So, due to the performance that we had within American National Can, I was invited to take over the role of Environmental Health and Safety Director for the Péchenet Group. But because they were linked, and the performance was terrible, right, globally, right? It wasn't very good if we just look at lost time and total incident rates. And most of that was located in Europe. The problem being in France was that because they were part of the French government was not necessarily holding them up to complete legal compliance. They weren't under the scrutiny because it would have been the French government's fault because they owned them before, kind of situation. Yeah. So I couldn't drive compliance, and I was formatted compliance, right? Like a lot of young engineers are. I had to find another way to get accident rates down, to improve and save lives. So the only thing that was left to me was working on systems and people, you know, getting into the minds of people and getting people to make the right decisions at the right time with respect to risk, or put the right risk management programs in place. The legal compliance, what I was originally brought up on, just wasn't going to work anymore. So that's how I actually got into it. I just fell into it by chance because there was no other way to actually try and help people. So let's just hope there are no people in my past, either in the United States or in France, that are actually going to listen to your podcast.
Excellent. So let's talk about a couple of the initiatives that you put together then. The first one being the now correct me if I get this wrong because it's been a while, but Rusty, the nudge theory.
Oh yeah, 2011. There was a book that came out that, well, nudge theory became quite famous on trying to change people's behavior by actually giving them something visual that at that moment in time when they see that would change the way that they react. And it's typically used in supermarkets, for example, at the time. I mean, it's things like putting the articles that they don't want you to buy on the very top shelf or the bottom shelf and putting the ones they want you to buy in the middle one. Is to nudge you in order to buy these articles. It's called choice architecture. And I thought at the time I was doing doing some work and in contact with the HSL, which is the Health and Safety Laboratories down in Buxton. And I came across a lady, a psychologist called Jenny Lunt. I don't know if Jenny Lunt, and we thought there was something here for safety people. So we started to think about how we could apply nudge and the idea of choice architecture to guide people to make a certain decision into health and safety. And we also saw at that time, to be perfectly honest with you, we do it all the time as a profession. You know, if you take something simple that when you're walking along in a facility and you see something that's got black and yellow stripes on it or whatever, you know to avoid it. You know, it actually attracts your eye and, you know, okay, I got a duck, it's a low beam or something like that. That's a nudge. So we realized that we already practice it in health and safety, but maybe we should accentuate it a little bit so that people would think, how can I nudge people to make the right decision at the right time by giving them, you could say, an unconscious choice. Back in 2011, it was too early. Honestly, I don't think the profession was ready for that kind of discussion. We produced an article that was endorsed and supported by IOSH in one of the IOSH magazines, and it didn't really take off. But I think it's taken off much more now, this idea of how can you influence people subconsciously to make the right kind of decision at the right time. And I think it's very important in safety because we can't all be there all the time. You know, the line managers are not there, the safety professionals are not there. And sometimes you have to rely on the individual to make the right decision from a risk perspective. And nudge is powerful for that, in my opinion. But it takes a bit of thought in order to think about it, you know?
One of the best ones I've ever seen like that, or heard of like that, was a good friend of mine, a guy called Eddie Woods, who I've had on the podcast previously as well. And he was working with a lot of the offshore oil companies, trying to get people to hold the handrail. Because it was vitally important on the oil platform that you don't fall down the stairs, of course. So he got little windmills, you know, the little kids' windmills that spin round in the wind, and he stuck them at all of the handles so that people went, windmill, oh, hold the handrail. Yeah, I thought that was an excellent nudge. Yeah.
It is, because in the sense, you're right, what it does, it attracts the eye. And there's another thing that when you look at the same kind of theory, it's that if you can attract the eye, very often you can induce automatic motor functions in the sense that, for example, have you ever played cricket?
No.
Well, let's pretend you've played cricket, okay? Let's pretend that was not the right answer, okay? But chances are, or if I was in your garden behind you, right, and I had a ball, and I throw the ball at you and you weren't ready for it, your eyes would see the ball, and without even thinking, chances are you'd catch the ball, or you'd make an effort to catch it. And what happens is your eyes see something, your brain reacts automatically, and it does something to you with your motor functions, in this case, your eye. So if you do something like that, like you were just describing, that attracts the eye, you can actually induce people to actually avoid falling downstairs. If you take the example, people fall downstairs, typically the fall is on the first 3 steps or the last 3 steps because of a lack of attention and the change of maybe heights. So if you paint the edges of the first 3 steps and the last 3 steps yellow, for example, it attracts the eye and it induces a motor reaction maybe with the legs. If at the same time you paint the first 6 inches of the handrail yellow, right, or blue or pink or whatever, it attracts the attention, and they're more likely to hold the handrail if you make that differentiation. If you painted it all yellow, it won't be as good, but it's just the first bit. So to anybody out there that's got slip, trips and falls problem, first 3 steps, edges, paint them yellow, last 3 steps, paint them yellow, and the first 6 inches of the handrail and the last 6 inches, and it'll make a difference.
Excellent. That's fascinating. So if we continue on, then we'll talk about another one of the initiatives that I know that you're very passionate about and that you've done a lot of work on. Let's move on to talk about the Hummingbird Theory.
Oh yes, I love the Hummingbird Theory. The Hummingbird Theory, or the legend of the hummingbird, just describes me to a T. It's everything that I do. And can I tell the story?
Yep.
Ah, good.
Yep.
So it's a story. It's a children's book, you know, with like cartoon designs in it, and it originates in America, I believe. And it's all about, there's a forest fire, okay, and all the animals rush out of the forest. You know, and obviously the effect of a forest fire is not good for the environment. It's not good for smoke. The impact on health, impact on the animals that that live in the forest. But most of the animals all come out of the forest. The hummingbird flies out of the forest, goes to the river, and takes a drop of water, as much as he can in his beak, goes to the fire, tries to put it out, and goes backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. Eventually, the other animals say, "Hey, hummingbird, you know, what are you doing? You're having absolutely no impact on that fire. You're not having any impact at all." And the other animals sort of turn around and say, "Well, look," he then turns around to the other animals and he says, "Well, look, first thing, I'm doing the best that I can. I'm trying to make a difference. And secondly, if every single one of you all took a little bit of water and put it on the fire, then maybe we're just going to put the fire out." So the message that I then transform in my contacts within L'Oreal is, if 88,000 L'Oreal employees every day do a little bit for health and safety, then that's one big thing. And
Yep.
that makes a big difference. And the bottom line is we can all make a difference no matter how small it is. And I'm a great believer of that approach. And you could go to a L'Oreal site in America, you can go to a L'Oreal site in China, and you will see hummingbirds painted on the walls, on the health and safety communication. So it's not just Malcolm Staves, it's actually become the symbol of health and safety for the whole of L'Oreal.
Excellent.
And it's my hashtag as well at LinkedIn, as you probably know.
Brilliant, brilliant. And it's all about the theory of marginal gain, isn't it? I quite like the old methodology of, will it make the boat go faster? That was a pretty interesting book, and it's about the England rowing team, about the marginal gains that they made to make the boat go faster, and anything that didn't was jettisoned. Yeah.
It's exactly that. And I heard another one the other day. I don't know if you've ever come across a journalist that used to write for the Irish magazine, Louis Wustman. Louis Wustman?
No, can't say it.
And he told me he's got another one that's very similar. And if you don't mind, I'm going to tell it because I love it just as much. But it's about turtles, right? Turtles. And he's saying that there's a guy walking along the beach and he comes across a small boy. And the small boy is surrounded by baby turtles, right? And they're all struggling to get to the sea and all the rest of it because it's on the beach. And there's thousands and thousands of them, and he's picking up them one by one and throwing them in. And the guy says to him, "Hey, you know, what are you doing? You know, what are you doing? You're having no impact at all. There's thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of these turtles, and you're having no real impact at all. So why bother?" And the little boy didn't say anything, and he went up and he got a turtle. He threw the turtle into the water, and he looked at the man and said, "I made a difference to that one." You know, and it's the same kind of thing. So I love stories like that. I really do.
Excellent, excellent. And if we move on a little bit, Malcolm, I believe you've met someone very famous, and this story will probably factor in pretty nicely, because I noticed that NASA have just put a communication out today to say that they've managed to land their exploration vehicle on Mars and sent back the first images. And I was just looking at that at LinkedIn before we came on the call. Absolutely fascinated with space exploration, and one of the best safety presentations I've ever seen was by Professor Anu at the Space Centre in Leicester, and I've been desperately trying to track him down to try and get him on the podcast because he's a fascinating person, but I've not had much luck yet. So hopefully in the next few weeks we'll be able to get him lined up to tell us a little bit about space exploration. Amazing. But if you want to come in and tell us your story, Malcolm.
Well, as you can probably see behind me, there's I don't see if you can see the space rocket. It's a Saturn V. it's the Lego version. So during the lockdown, I did the Saturn V. But I'm a great fan of the Apollo Moon series, as well as everything that NASA do. And I had an opportunity to meet Neil Armstrong once. And I mean, my hero. This was back in about 2005, 2006. But getting there was a nightmare. I was in the United States. I was in Chicago, and there was one of the biggest storms ever. My flight was cancelled, and I was supposed to be meeting Neil the next day for dinner, Neil Armstrong. And I was desperate. Eventually, they got me a flight to Detroit, going in the wrong direction, with my bags and all the rest of it. And my bags were in the hold, and they rushed me onto. They told me that when I got there, there was a British Airways flight. So I was supposed to be flying to Geneva, but now they were going to fly me to London, and they'd arranged for me to get a flight when I got to London to go to Geneva. And if everything worked well, I would arrive half an hour before my dinner with Neil Armstrong, plus other people, right? My hero, you know, and I'm thinking, what am I doing in the United States here? Bottom line is, I caught the flights. For some unknown reason, they lost my bags in London, right? So when I arrived in Geneva, I am in the clothes I've had on for like 24 hours. And I was supposed to be having dinner with Neil Armstrong. And I got to the hotel and I explained what was going on and all the rest of it. And they said, look, just go get yourself a shower, because now I was down to 20 minutes before the dinner was due to start, right? And they said, we'll do something for you. And I'll never forget this. They turned up within 10 minutes, so I'm counting the clock, with 5 different suits, right? The problem was the suits were the suits of the bellboys, right? So I had a choice. Anyhow, so I went in, I had dinner with the guy, along with other people as well. I mean, it was one of the crowning moments. The next day, listened to him do one of the most amazing presentations that I've ever come across in my life. I was absolutely captivated. Got to meet him. This is the hand that shook him. I shook his hand. I got to ask him a couple of questions, and he was so down to earth, friendly, very, very open. And, you know, thanks to, at the time, all the American sort of Airways, British Airways, the Intercontinental Hotel. But I've still got the pictures, and the suit is a horrible color. It is too big for me. But, you know, I still got to meet Neil Armstrong, and I will never, ever forget that moment, nor the journey that I had, that I nearly missed it. Because if I'd have missed it, I would have been devastated, if you know what I mean. But anyhow, so this is the hand.
Sometimes it just all lines up so that it fits together, doesn't it?
I mean, can you imagine? You start in Chicago, your flight's cancelled. You know you've got to get to Geneva you want to get to Geneva for a dinner, and you eventually make it into the hotel 20 minutes before. I mean, everything just lined up. It was like, I loved it.
So if we continue forward a little bit more, Malcolm, can you tell us what's been your biggest challenge, either in your career or in health and safety in general?
I think my biggest challenge has always been, I've worked for 10 companies, and each time I've had to adapt to the culture of the company. I've had to adapt the way that I present things, the way that I even talk to people, etc. Because I mean, when I worked for a company like, say, Pechenay in the aluminium side, it was very sort of top down. You were very straight. It was manufacturing. It was big stuff, right? If I take the other extreme now in L'Oreal, there's a whole diverse range of cultures, from manufacturing with your traditional manufacturing sort of culture, very safety orientated, etc., to people in marketing that safety is important to them, but it's not, but they don't see the risk at work, if you know what I mean. And the people that have been through marketing all their life, so you have to change the discussion in order to get the best out of them, or for them to relate to. And it was something that I learned early on in my life, in my safety career anyhow, is that it's not for them to accept what I want to tell them. It's for me to adapt my language and the way I present it to get them on board. And that is, I believe, is the role of a health and safety professional. It's not to try and force a square peg into a round hole. It's for us to change our culture, our style, etc., so we get the best out of other people and keep them safe. But I nearly lost my job a couple of years ago. I mean, it was a horrible moment, but yet a pivotal moment as well. I don't know if you've ever heard of the SIF, you know, the serious injury fatality programs, etc.
Mhm.
And I don't like the word SIF because when you talk to most senior managers, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a word. So within L'Oreal, we created a program and we called it LIFE. And it stands for life-changing incident or fatality event. And everybody, doesn't matter what language you talk about, you know all about life. And life is life. And what happened here was that I presented to a senior exec, and I knew what I was talking about, and I knew what the figures meant. I presented we were 83% compliant with our LIFE program, right, which is a new program. I was really proud that we were at 83%. And I knew that even though the sites or the others were, sites were not 100% compliant, they were just not doing anything. They had other things in place to manage the risk. It wasn't exactly as we'd asked for. But this person didn't realize that. And I didn't realize that she didn't know that. And she looked at me and said, 83% compliant, that means that we have a 17% chance of killing somebody in L'Oreal. And from that moment, that conversation went downhill.
Mhm.
It was in front of 60 of my peers. And instead of a 10, 15-minute presentation that I hadn't, obviously I thought I prepared for, but I hadn't, I was there being crucified for 1.5 hours. Because all of a sudden she thought that I hadn't done my job, right? And we could kill people in L'Oreal. And she panicked. And I, to be honest with you, I deserved it because I didn't do my homework. But we rebounded from that, and I explained everything to her. We actually redesigned the program so it was more explicit. So there was a positive out of it. I'm a great believer in looking at the positives. But I'll tell you something, it was a scary moment because I love my job in L'Oreal, and I love my job in L'Oreal.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks for sharing that with us as well, Malcolm. So if we move on a little bit, can you tell us a little bit more about your role that you're in just now with L'Oreal, what it involves day to day?
Yeah, it's quite a wide role. So it does include, as I said before, anything from our sales force, factories, R&I, distribution centers, admin sites, manufacturing sites, which is around about, we have about 530 facilities worldwide, 41 factories, 350 of them are admin sites. We have 1,500 stores worldwide. So you can see the breadth of the kind of activities we have, and with each of them have different cultures. But what it makes it even more complicated is even within the individual countries, the cultures change as well. So an English culture is not the same as a French culture, which is not the same as an American culture. So it becomes complicated. So my job and my team, I have an excellent team of EHS experts, but also EHS leaders, because we focus on the leadership and we focus on management skills, not just being experts. We drive, you could say, the programs centrally through our zones and through to our sites. So we're a very centralized organization with corporate directives, corporate systems, but we allow flexibility within our programs locally so that they work. So a site can modify one of our programs because as we've written it, the frame we've given to them is not exactly right for them, for their culture, therefore that they can adapt it. One of the classic ones is the fact that on behavioral-based safety in the program that we have, which is a purely behavioral-based safety for line management. So it's a line management program. We can't apply the same in Japan because the culture is quite different. So it's more of a yes and a no approach rather than an open discussion. I also look after fire protection globally for L'Oreal as well. So that comes into that with the team. And we basically interact with zones, with countries where we have EHS people, and then we have up to EHS people within our sites. In total, we have 650 OSH professionals throughout the organization, spread throughout the world. And our job basically is not only to provide the main tools and methods, but to animate that, to look at the development of animate the senior team, identify what needs to be done to move us further along our culture journey. within the group. It's not about our performance. I mean, a lot of people ask me the question, and maybe you're going to ask me about performance. We believe as well, and I believe that if you have every single system we put in place, say a risk assessment program, we treat it as a mini system in itself. So we ask the question, what is the role of the line management? What is the role of the employees? What is the role of the EHS team? And what are the KPIs, the leading indicators that drive that mini system? And we do that for every single program. And we believe that the output of that is your lost time rate, or is your total incident rate, or whatever your lagging indicators you have. So we don't focus on the lagging indicators too much, but more on driving the system towards excellence and beyond. So, and then recently, two things that have been quite good that we've launched. One of them, and maybe you're going to talk to me about it, was Safe at Work, Safe at Home, which is quite a big program. And the other one recently, internally as well as externally, we've recently launched a Women in Safety program within L'Oreal as well. We're trying to promote gender equality within our profession. So there's a lot going on.
Excellent. Okay, Malcolm, so if we move forward a little bit again then, what's coming up in the future? Where are you going next? What's Malcolm's next big challenge?
Malcolm's next big challenge, and I think this is L'Oreal's challenge, and it comes from us a bit from our approach of Safe at Work, Safe at Home, and that program is all about exporting our culture into our families, into our communities, but also into other companies, right? We believe as a large company like we are, there is a social responsibility with respect to health and safety beyond the gates of the company. One of the things we're working on is driving to put what I call people back into sustainability. So originally back in the late 90s, sustainability was environmental health and safety. But for many reasons we can't talk about now, the health and safety part, especially the occupational health and safety, has been pushed to one side. And very often, if you talk to the youth of today, they say sustainability, environment, right? That's the way they think of it. And the people part has been lost, which I think is a shame because, as you probably know, there are 2.78 million people die every year because they worked, either from illnesses or from physical accidents, every single year. COVID, which is a really bad thing, but we're talking 2 million people dying, right? And this will go because of the vaccination, etc. Yet we accept 2.78 million people every year. So what we're trying to do is, at the moment, and it's a big thing, is spread the word about trying to, at the United Nations Global Compact, with the big standards agencies, the disclosure companies, to get health and safety to be part of the data set. Because I don't know if you know, but when they ask questions to corporations and to companies about sustainability, it's very heavy environment, and that needs to change. We need to put people back into the center. And I think it's a shame, and a crying shame, that along the way, from where it started back in the late 90s, that people have been put out, to a large extent, put out of the sustainability debate and the sustainability agenda. So that's one thing. The other thing is what I mentioned to you was women in safety. Within L'Oreal, my corporate team is 50-50. And since that's happened, I'll be honest with you, I've seen better dynamics within my team, better collaboration, better decision-making. So we looked at where we were globally, and we're about 20% globally, 20% women within our global EHS, occupational health and safety professionals. And then I said to myself, well, surely if I think we get better decision making because we've got better equality in my team, then maybe it's the same globally. And if we in our business make better decisions, we save lives. So I think it makes sense within occupational health and safety to have more gender equality. After that, we can talk about inclusion, but our focus is on gender equality. So we've launched Women in Safety internally. And then with Louise Hoskin, we've co-founded a global coalition of women in safety networks, bringing the likes of the American Society of Safety Professionals, the Canadian equivalent, people in Sri Lanka, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, etc., bringing them all together. And the idea is that we want to raise the profile of women in safety, because it's not a question of, it's a question of talent as well. You know, I know, and probably you do, there's a lot of women out there that are very, very good health and safety professionals.
Yeah.
Yet on the other hand, most of the conferences that I attend, the people that deliver the presentations are typically, I'm going to say this, white, male, and over 50 like me. And I think that needs to change. And I think if we make that change within our profession, then honestly, we're going to make better decisions. And one more thing that we're working on, and we've just started it in L'Oreal, but I'm trying to work with other organizations on it, is the future of the profession. I think we need to get out of this box of being seen as just experts. I think we need to stay experts, but we need to develop our management, communication, presentation skills, the way being able to modify our leadership style depend on who we see in front of us. And I think that's the biggest weakness in our profession at the moment when I look globally, is that we have too many people that are in that haven't moved on, and they're old-fashioned health and safety, and they need to be better leaders. So
yeah.
They're exciting projects, but I still see myself in L'Oreal up until when I retire. I'm not gonna. I just love my job, and I just love working for this company.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show, Malcolm. It's been brilliant speaking to you. It's great to finally put a face to the name after all of those years ago that I read about you in the IOSH magazine.
Yeah, so a long time ago, huh?
Yeah, for sure. So thank you very much for coming on, and I hope to catch up with you soon.
It's been my pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for the invite.
This podcast is sponsored by Inside Out Group, the specialists in high-risk and challenging filming and time-lapse, covering health and safety videos for rail, construction, and infrastructure projects nationwide.